Okay, let's unpack this. There's a real buzz right now, in legal circles, government corridors, probably even over morning coffee. We're seeing this significant tug of war playing out. It's quite a constitutional drama, actually.
It really is, between two very powerful players.
Exactly. The Union Home Ministry, the MHA, and the High Court in Jammu and Kashmir, we're going to do a deep dive into this. It's a fascinating case, intensely personal too, and really, really consequential.
Mm-hmm.
It pits the MHA directly against the High Court. And right in the middle of it all, well, there's a person, Rakshanda Rashid, a 62-year-old woman. Her deportation is what kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah, she's sort of the human element at the center of this institutional clash.
Right. So our mission today really is to cut through the noise, pull out the key things you need to know from this whole saga, to help understand these tensions, judiciary versus executive, national security, individual rights. It's all in there.
And what's fascinating here, I think, beyond just her specific story, which is compelling, is that this isn't just some, local legal fight. This could have much bigger implications. It really feels like it could set some major precedents.
How so?
Well, it's shaping up to be a critical test case, potentially redefining just how far courts can go in reviewing executive decisions, especially when you're talking about sensitive stuff like national security, foreign policy.
Ah, right. Especially when there aren't clear treaties, like you mentioned.
Precisely. Every judgment here, every step, it kind of redraws the lines, It shapes how these powerful branches interact down the road. It really does impact that delicate balance of power.
Okay, so let's talk about Rakshanda Rashid herself. Who is she? Because she's not just a name in a court filing. Her story in India goes back an astonishing 38 years.
The 38 years. Just think about that.
I know, nearly 4 decades. She lived in Jammu, called it home, all on a long-term visa she got way back in 1987.
So most of her adult life, really.
Pretty much. And it wasn't like she wasn't trying to make it official. She actually applied for Indian citizenship.
Okay. When was that?
Get this. 1996.
96. Wow.
Yeah. And that application, it's still pending, just sitting there, lost in the bureaucracy for almost 30 years.
That's incredible. Living in limbo for that long.
Exactly. Building a life, family, connections, all while technically still being a foreign national on paper. It's quite something.
And then this long period of uncertainty, this decades-long wait.
Yeah.
It all just exploded recently, didn't it?
It did. What was the trigger?
Well, the immediate catalyst was that awful Pahalgam terror attack, a truly devastating event. 26 people tragically lost their lives.
Just horrific.
Absolutely. And in the wake of that, in that atmosphere of crisis and heightened security concerns, the authorities decided Rakshanda Rashid needed to be deported, sent back to Pakistan, her country of origin.
Okay. So, a decision seemingly driven by national security concerns after the attack.
From the executive's viewpoint, yes. It seems they saw it as a necessary step, however difficult, given the circumstances.
But that wasn't the end of it, was it?
Not at all. This is where it gets really complicated. The Jammu and Kashmir High Court stepped in, and they acted fast. They issued a direct order to the government, saying, essentially, you need to bring her back.
Bring her back?
Yes. Bring her back to India within 10 days.
Wow. 10 days. That's a strong move from the court.
It was incredibly decisive. And that order, that direct countermand to the executive's action, that's what really lit the fuse on this whole legal firestorm, a direct clash.
So the MHA, the Union Home Ministry, they obviously weren't just going to accept that. How did they react?
Oh, they reacted strongly, very strongly.
They're appealing, I assume?
They are appealing, yes. But it's more than just a standard appeal. They're framing this as a fundamental challenge to their authority.
Like drawing a line in the sand?
Exactly. They're essentially saying, look, deportation, especially when it involves national security, immigration, that's our job. That's executive territory.
Not the courts.
Not the judiciaries, in their view. The analogy might be like, imagine the military making a strategic decision on the ground.
Okay.
And then a court suddenly orders them to reverse that tactical move from afar. That's kind of how the MHA seems to see this.
They're saying, this is our constitutional role. We're equipped for this, not you.
Precisely. They view the court's order as a serious overreach, stepping right into their constitutionally assigned lane.
So what are their specific arguments, legally speaking?
Well, their core claim, the phrase they're using, is that the High Court's order is constitutionally impermissible and unsustainable.
Strong words. What does that mean in practice?
Basically, they're arguing the court doesn't have the constitutional power to make this kind of order. Decisions about who enters or leaves the country, especially linked to foreign relations and national security. That's typically executive discretion. The courts can review the process, maybe was due process followed, but not usually the substance of the decision itself.
So the court telling them who to bring back across a border is seen
As
as...
a direct interference in their job, yes, a usurpation of their function.
Okay. And there was something about international law, too. Pakistan.
Yes, and this is a huge practical point for the MHA.
Hmm.
India has no extradition treaty with Pakistan.
Right.
Which means?
Which means there's no formal legal mechanism, no international agreement
Yeah.
that obliges Pakistan to cooperate in sending her back or even accepting her if India somehow tried to return her after deportation.
So the court's order is asking the government to do something it might not actually be able to do legally or practically on the international stage.
Exactly. It turns a domestic court order into a potentially impossible international diplomatic situation. The MHA calls it diplomatically untenable. It could cause major headaches internationally, undermine foreign policy, because you're asking the government to basically compel another sovereign nation to act without any legal tool to do so, especially given the often tense relationship.
Right. That adds a whole other layer of complexity. So this whole situation really throws a spotlight on that fundamental principle, doesn't it? The separation of powers.
Absolutely. It's a textbook example almost.
You've got the legislature making laws, the executive enforcing them and running the country, and the judiciary interpreting laws and ensuring justice. Three branches, each with its own job.
Checks and balances.
Checks and balances, exactly. But sometimes, like we're seeing here, they end up, well, stepping on each other's toes. And that brings up this term you hear a lot, judicial overreach. The idea that courts might be going too far, getting into policy making.
It's a constant debate. Are the courts being too activist, as some say?
Or are they just doing their job, protecting rights and holding the government accountable?
Precisely. You can argue it both ways, and often people do, depending on the specific issue.
This is where it gets really interesting, because there are strong arguments on both sides here.
Indeed. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of friction, is it?
No, not at all. This tension, it's almost built into the system.
It's a recurring theme in India's history. You can look back at the emergency in '75, for example.
Right, when judicial powers were seriously curtailed.
Or think more recently. The Supreme Court rulings on things like triple talaq or Article 370, those were major interventions, directly impacting executive and legislative actions, and they sparked huge debates about who has the final say.
Yeah, each time it forces a conversation about those boundaries.
Exactly. It's this constant process of calibration. And when the MHA talks about diplomatic untenability with Pakistan,
Yeah.
that really highlights the limits of domestic law in the international arena. International law is like, well, it's like rules for the global neighborhood.
But no world police to enforce them.
Right. Countries agree to norms, treaties help, but ultimately compliance often depends on goodwill, shared interests, or power dynamics. Without a specific treaty like extradition, India can ask Pakistan, but it can't compel them legally. That really strengthens the MHA's argument about the court order being impractical.
Okay, let's pause on the legal intricacies for a second and come back to Rakshanda Rashid, because amidst all this constitutional debate, there's a real person whose life has been completely upended.
Yes, it's crucial not to lose sight of that.
She's not just case law. She lived in India for nearly 4 decades, built a life, family ties, and now, suddenly, she's back in Pakistan. A country she left so long ago it must feel, well, alien.
It must be incredibly disorienting, after 38 years going back to a place you barely know.
It's like being sent back to a relative's house you visited as a small child and being told, this is home now. It just underscores how these big institutional battles, even when fought over principles, can have devastating personal consequences. Her life is caught in the middle.
Absolutely. And that brings us right to the potential fallout, the precedents this could set. The Supreme Court's decision on the MHA's appeal is going to be huge. Not just for her, but for how things work in India moving forward.
So what are the possible outcomes?
Well, if the MHA wins the appeal, the High Court's order gets overturned. That likely means Rakshanda Rashid stays in Pakistan. The government wouldn't be obligated to try and bring her back.
And that would strengthen the executive's hand in future deportation cases?
It certainly would. It would signal that courts should be very cautious about intervening in these specific areas: immigration, national security, deportation.
Okay. And if the High Court's order is upheld?
Then the government is in a really tight spot, a constitutionally difficult position. How do you actually enforce that order? How do you get someone back from another country that isn't obliged to help and might actively resist?
It seems almost impossible without cooperation.
It highlights this incredibly delicate balance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like walking a tightrope. If courts start dictating every detail of foreign relations or deportation, maybe it leads to chaos, undermines the executive's ability to govern effectively.
Okay.
But the flip side is just as important. If the government can deport someone, especially someone with such deep roots, without any meaningful judicial check, what prevents potential abuses? What safeguards individual rights against arbitrary state action?
And that really raises the human rights question here, doesn't it?
It does. This raises an important question. Is deporting her after 38 years with a citizenship application pending for decades a violation of her basic rights? Her life was here.
That's a powerful point.
But then you also have the government's perspective. Post-Pahalgam attack, the immense pressure regarding national security. Even if there's no stated link between her and the attack, in the sources we have, the government will argue it acted within its duty to protect the nation.
So it's that classic, incredibly difficult tension of
Yeah.
national security versus individual rights.
Exactly, and that's why this case is so complex, so significant, and frankly, so controversial.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us and you, the listener? I think this case is just a very vivid reminder that democracy, well, it can be messy.
That's one way to put it.
You know, it's the system of checks and balances. And sometimes checking and balancing involves friction, involves these big clashes. You've got different branches doing their jobs, sometimes bumping up against each other. Legislature, executive, judiciary, all playing their part.
And hopefully finding the right balance in the end.
Hopefully. Rakshanda Rashid's story, her personal journey, is now tied up in this huge legal saga, a real testament to how power works, or sometimes clashes, in a democracy. And now, well, she waits. We all wait for the next chapter from the courts.
Indeed. And maybe the final thought to leave everyone with is this. This case forces us to confront a really fundamental question, one that democracies everywhere grapple with. How do you balance that absolute need for national security, the state's duty to protect its people, with the fundamental human rights of individuals? Especially when those individuals live lives that cross borders, build identities in new places, and get caught in bureaucratic delays that last for decades.
A tough question with no easy answers.
None at all. It's right at the heart of modern governance, pushing us to constantly think about power, justice, and rights in our very complex world.